Hi, this is Leanji. Today I would like to share with you my studies on the Toronto School and also its influence in the communication space. So this presentation is divided into 5 parts. First, I will talk about the school in general, and then followed by the monopoly of knowledge, the bias of communication, strong oral tradition, and new journalism. First and foremost, theory introduction. So a little bit intro about the Toronto School. The School of Communication was established in 1960s by University of Toronto representative scholars Herbert Marshall McLuhan, Harold Adams Innes, and Eric Havelock. So the Toronto School proposed a new theory and new media analysis that spread in the first place of human cultural structure and human mind, which had a major impact on the development of communication. Since the school has such a great influence on the communication space in Canada, so it's always associated with the origins of Canadian social theory or Canadian communication theory. The Toronto School was led by 3 extraordinary scholars, Innes, McLuhan, and George Grant. The school has always been known for its daring and original media theory. The scholars emphasized the influence of the balance between time bias and spatial bias on the social stability and championed the idea of media as information. The Toronto School can be divided, was developed throughout 3 stages. First, the bias of communication. And second, media is the message. And last but not least, the skin of culture. This is how the whole presentation was divided as well. So a little bit intro about the 3 scholars. Innes, he was a Canadian professor of political economy. His writing on communications really discovered the role of media and positioned media in terms of how it shaped the culture and how it developed the civilization. And McLuhan, he was a Canadian philosopher. His work is one of the cornerstones of the study of the media theory. So the second part of my presentation is about book reading and journal writing. A little bit introduction to the writing. Innes, which is the extraordinary scholar that I just mentioned, his 2 most well-known books are The Empire and Communications and The Bias of Communication. This reading, The Bias of Communication, is often referred to as standard textbooks on media and communication and almost always used as a standard rules when the discussion turns towards the matter of technology development and consideration of time-space issues. So the medium of communication has important influence on the dissemination of knowledge over space and time. For space, is when it's light and easily transported, it has space bias. And when it's heavy and durable, it has time bias. So if we take a step back and think about how different steps of media impacted on the nature of communication and the communication process, which over time changed the nature of civilization. And here I would like to introduce a term called monopoly of knowledge. This is where how everything started out. So this has something to do with the Egyptian civilization, which was powerfully influenced by the river of Nile, but after a long process, eventually a monopoly of knowledge, which was supported by a difficult script in the Egyptian culture, it was against the demands for change, which eventually leads to the end of Egyptian empire. On the opposite side, the empires of Eurasia and Persia emphasized control over space, but they were not able to solve the problems of time in the face of monopolies of religion in Babylonia and Egypt. And when time goes by, in the 5th century of before Common Era, in Athens, the cultural flowering of Athens in the 5th century, the second half of the 5th century, writing began to thrive on the oral tradition time, and papyrus was replaced by parchment, and parchment became the medium through which a monopoly of knowledge was built up by religion. And here, when this monopoly of knowledge invited the competition of new medium named paper from China. As most of you know, China is a country where a new medium and new writing technology was developed. And paper further supported the invention of the printing press. And the bias of communication in paper and the printing industry was offset by the bias of the radio. And radio was further evolved into three things, uh, which is new journalism, new medium, and new phase in the history of Western civilization. And now some takeaways and conclusions. So for modeling, I have three uh, thoughts. First and foremost, when studying the characteristics of medium of communication, assessment should be determined within a particular cultural setting. And secondly, such study will reveal whether a medium of communication is a good fit to deliver knowledge over time and over space. And finally, no matter is time biased or space biased, a medium of communication will be significant and also work differently in cultural settings where the medium is operated. And the conclusion of the whole study is that the book demonstrates the influence of time bias, spatial bias, and space-time media on national character and the history from how the medium started to where we are now. And now, as we come to the final part of the presentation, I would like to add something to make the whole research more solid and concrete. So about video and YouTube content, because many of the topics covered in this chapter are knowledge points of Asian history. So I would suggest that scholars or any of the students use Asian maps to make videos. And secondly, the development of Asian civilization is inseparable from writing of text or murals. So I would intend to find relevant pictures to add to the videos. So this is about the presentation and my study about this Toronto school. Is there any questions?